In any emergency situation which leads into a humanitarian crisis like the one in Tigray or in other areas of the world and in Ethiopia, UN agencies have a pre-established responsibility which is aligned to their mandate and competencies. So today we will hear about, from two UN agencies operating in the situation in Addis, namely World Food Programme and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. As a result of hostilities in Tigray, people are escaping from violence and in fact spilling over to Sudan in some cases and other areas in Ethiopia. But an ever greater number of refugees are on the other side of the border towards Sudan. Even before hostilities broke out, about 100,000 Eritrean refugees were in several camps in Tigray, further complicating the humanitarian crisis, I imagine. Paul Turnbull, who is the Deputy Director of WFP in Ethiopia, has a very long experience from the region and in particular from Ethiopia. And he is going to present to us the operations of WFP in Ethiopia today. But I'd like to remind us ourselves that in 2020, WFP received the Peace Nobel Prize, both for its role in promoting food security and combating hunger, but also for the important role to promote peace and stability and avoid that hunger is used as a weapon of war and conflict. With those few words, over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much for the generous introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to present WFP's work in specific work we're doing in Tigray region. You'll notice from the first slide that this is not taken in Tigray. This is taken in Somali region, and WFP's main operational area is actually in Somali region. We do have operations in most of the regions, but our largest responsibilities are in Somali region, and I'll go into the reasons for that during the presentation. Next slide, please. So, as Jason was alluding, it's a very complex emergency in the Ethiopian context at the moment. Ethiopia has hosted refugees for decades. So there's nothing really new about that, but it continues. And it's a heavy burden on the country and humanitarian agencies. Drought and floods have always been recurrent issues in Ethiopia, and very large populations have been suffering from chronic and acute food insecurity because of that. What is more recent, perhaps, is the internal displacement. Jason described some of the reasons for this. And in 2018, there were the largest populations of displaced people in the world were in Ethiopia, both by conflict and also by weather, such as drought. So the internal displacement has been a huge issue for the last few years in Ethiopia, and something that continues to be a serious problem at the moment. 2019 also brought with it desert locust infestations, which have been the largest in Ethiopia and also in Eastern Africa for decades. So this has been a serious problem, and Tigray has been one of the regions that's been impacted by the desert locust, as well as Afar, Somali region, and other parts of the country. COVID-19, well, no country has been spared from COVID-19. That has been serious in Ethiopia. Unfortunately, the testing doesn't really allow us at the moment to see the scale of COVID-19 in the country, but we have recorded positivity rates of 10%, which is very worrying. Ethiopia never went into a lockdown like many of its neighbors. There were probably good reasons why that was not considered a feasible option. But it's also probably true to say that COVID-19 has not damaged the Ethiopian health system to the extent that it has in many other countries. It's certainly damaged many sectors of the economy. But COVID-19 has not maybe been as bad as people had predicted in Ethiopia. Still, the pandemic is not over yet. So we're all having to take measures to reduce the risks. And that includes a lot of government workers and UN workers or humanitarians generally working from home. So layered on top of this, all of these problems, and if we thought earlier in the year that there were enough problems confronting Ethiopia, in November the Tigray crisis erupted. So this has been a completely, as Jason alluded, it was not a complete shock, but all the contingency planning that the UN and international NGOs and national NGOs had been doing sadly was not enough to cope with the scale of the humanitarian impact of the crisis. And looking ahead, we have the general elections. I do believe that a date has been fixed in the first week of June 2021. And with the tensions in the country, this is it's a serious concern for all of us humanitarians in the country, as well as, of course, the electors themselves. Next slide, please. So what is WFP actually doing in Ethiopia? Well, I'm just going to show you a couple of slides that illustrate how WFP generally does its work within the Sustainable Development Goals. We have direct links from the Zero Hunger SDG 2 and also the Partnerships for the Goals SDG 17. And all of WFP's work globally fits in with these two SDGs. So all of our results frameworks are to link to the SDGs to show very deliberate connections with the SDGs. We do have some activities that that are linked to the other SDGs, but we really focus in terms of measuring results on zero hunger and partnerships for the goals. This diagram is, I'm afraid it's very, very busy, but just illustrates WFP's, the sorts of strategic results we're looking at and how they link to the national SDG targets. Next slide, please. So WFP Ethiopia has specifically chosen just 4 particular areas of work under Zero Hunger and Partnerships for the Goals. So the first one being access to food, second one being end malnutrition, third capacity strengthening, and the fourth one to enhance global partnerships. So all the activities that WFP is doing in Ethiopia are linked to those strategic results that WFP has in its corporate framework. Next slide, please. So what does that mean in practice? So our outcomes and activities are always linked to national frameworks in the country and also working with other agencies, both UN and non-governmental organizations, as well as the government frameworks. So our first, and this is where the largest investment in WFP is on emergency response during times of crisis, which is not just linked, of course, to Tigray. One of our main activities there is relief. We provide food or cash assistance to crisis affected populations, and this is part of the Ethiopian humanitarian response plan. Also, our nutrition activity is also part of the humanitarian response plan, and this is the treatment of moderate acute malnutrition, which we do all over the country. Third activity is providing food assistance to refugees. We provide food for school feeding projects, and we assist the government with a homegrown school meals program. And we also provide assistance to safety nets and resilience building activities. Third outcome is trying to prevent chronic and acute malnutrition. I'm afraid this one is a huge job, which this activity alone, of course, cannot do. But we are focused on policy on nutrition with the government, working also on preventing undernutrition through activities to prevent stunting, and these are linked to the Productive Safety Net program. The fourth outcome is on country capacity strengthening. A lot of the issues that are facing Ethiopia's food security problems are to do with capacity. So WFP has an ambitious, perhaps, program of advisory and technical services for strengthening the national systems. And the fifth outcome is on our aviation service, which includes the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service, supply chain services, which are provided to the government and other partners. Basically, is a bilateral service that we provide through our strong logistics capacity. And then the 10th activity that we have in Ethiopia is the logistics cluster. Some of you probably know that there's a cluster system that the United Nations agencies work with, and this means that WFP and the government operate a logistics cluster to provide services to the government and other UN partners and NGOs in the country. So this is the broad description of WFP's activities in Ethiopia. We call it our country strategic plan. Next slide, please. Now, this relates to that first slide that I mentioned about WFP main area of focus being Somali region. This map shows the divisions of responsibility between the government, this is the NDRMC, the Joint Emergency Operation, which is a consortium of NGOs, and WFP. You can see that WFP is focused on Somali region. That's the area where we have primary responsibility for delivering relief resources under the humanitarian response plan. Elsewhere in the country, and the green colored areas, they're covered by the government, and in the orangey colored areas, they're covered by the Joint Emergency Operation. Now, this means that wherever there's a problem, basically the agency that is designated to respond knows that it has to respond to whatever problem is there. So, for example, if there's a large group of internally displaced people in Somali region, it would be WFP's responsibility to respond to that. We call it the one warrior or district, one operator principle. So this is how the relief system in Ethiopia has evolved. And you can see that in Tigray, it's the government and the Joint Emergency Operation that has the primary responsibility for assisting relief beneficiaries, be they through drought, floods, desert locusts, or internal displacements. There have been occasions where, due to relative strengths, other agencies have been brought to assist in the relief operations. For example, there was a large influx of internally displaced people in East and West Harare. That's the area around that you can see around Diradawa and Harar. And in those areas, WFP was asked to intervene because there was a large influx of IDPs in those areas, and the government and other agencies weren't really able to respond at that time. So WFP for 2 years actually took the responsibility for the internally displaced people at that time. So there is some flexibility, but generally there's a clear responsibility on which agency has to respond to a particular crisis. Next slide, please. So I'm finalizing the overall picture of WFP in Ethiopia through this slide, which just shows the areas where WFP has a presence. We're in 9 regions and 1 city administration. We have sub-offices in the country. We spread in most of the regions. We have about 800 staff. In addition, we have some outsourced staff as well. We have over 30 warehouses, approximately 270,000 metric tons of storage. We have our own small fleet of trucks and airplanes, but we do contract. Most of our transport is done through commercial contracting. There are about 1,500 food distribution sites. So it is a challenging job to monitor. About $400 million.
Paul, are you there? No, I think it's very bad connection.
Hello, Katya, has my connection been resumed?
Oh, yeah, now you're here. But
Okay.
Because it's a very bad connection, maybe you can take away your video and just have a sound.
Right, okay.
Perfect,
Let's
thank
try
you.
that. Let's try that. Of course, the internet is famously unreliable in Ethiopia. So that's just a map of basically our presence in the country and some of our capacities. To the next slide, please. So let's go on to WP-specific activities in Tigray. Our largest operation is actually for the refugee population. While there are approximately 100,000 refugees in the region registered, the number of people in camps just before the crisis was about 50,000. So WFP works with the government and UNHCR to provide the food assistance there. Outside the refugee camps, we provide the targeted supplementary feeding. This is the treatment of moderate acute malnutrition for young children and mothers. And we have a crop insurance initiative for about 200,000 people. Probably the most crucial area at the moment is the co-leadership of the logistics cluster. So this included the relocation of humanitarian staff from Tigray in November. It includes the road and logistics assessments, and we're also providing facilities for storage coordination and information management on supply chain issues. And just to reiterate that the general food distributions are currently the responsibility of the government and the NGOs. Next slide, please. So what are the major challenges? Well, it's probably not a surprise to many of you who've been following the news that it's the continued lack of access into Tigray, which is the main challenge. There has been some progress. We do have an agreement that was signed between the UN and the government on enhanced coordination mechanism for humanitarian access, but we've still got quite a long way to go. There is a commitment to the humanitarian principles in this agreement, and it has been able to provide some it has been able to provide the basis for some assessment missions. And we have managed to deliver food to some parts, such as the southern Tigray camps. Security concerns remain. There are still reports of significant fighting, kind of hit and run raids for the most part along the major corridors and elsewhere. And we do need to have security risk assessments before moving in staff and resources into areas. Next slide, please. This last slide just shows some of the options that we've got. Normally, we would have been providing food assistance through the two options on the western part of Tigray. We've had to explore alternative entry points through northwest Amhara, and we have been successful in providing assistance to the camps at Mayani and Adiharush in December. So we were able to provide food there. Unfortunately, we have not been able to reach the northern camps of Hitsas and Shemelba. The conditions have not been secure enough for us to be able to take food convoys into those areas. So this is a logistics map from November. I'm afraid that not too much has changed in terms of the options. So we are all still struggling with trying to find access into Tigray. There have been some improvements on supply to Mekelle, but I'm afraid that elsewhere it's been fairly bleak in terms of being able to reach the people that are in need of food assistance.
Well, thank you very much for this very important presentation, which shows all the difficulties that the UN has to find solutions to in a situation where conflict is still rampant. The access to the population in need of humanitarian assistance as well as protection is one of the most significant ones. And that leads us up to the presentation from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees,